Hello, friends, and welcome to the Interworld podcast, where we explore the intersection of personal and collective transformation. My name is Yasha S. Wagner, and I'm a PhD researcher in the field of psychology, well-being, and spirituality, as well as a founder of the Interworld Institute for Inner World Peace. You can learn more about our nonprofit initiatives by going to interworld.org. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with an old friend, Hector Garcia. Hector also goes by Puma as a spiritual name, and I call him Puma, so I'll be using that throughout the episode. Puma is a multi-instrumentalist, facilitator of various workshops where he holds a container for empowering the participants. And Puma is from Mexico and is a student of the indigenous traditions of South, Central, and North America, which we'll be speaking about in some depth today. Puma's journey through studying with some of these different tribal lineages of the Americas. So I'm excited to explore these topics and practices. And without further ado, here's my interview with Puma. Hey, brother. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, you got it.
All right. So I just wanted to give people a little background for a moment. You know, Puma, you and I have known each other for many years, and we actually haven't seen each other in several years. The last time we crossed paths was actually in Utah at a flute camp where there were a whole gathering of flute teachers and flute traders and craftspeople, and it was all flute focused education and sharing in Utah. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot for sure. Yeah.
And we've also shared some other journeys together before that. But for now, I just want to introduce you to the audience a little more. So I know the bio doesn't paint a full picture, and it would be great to hear a little bit more about your origin story, where you come from, what your journey has been, and the work that you do now. So if you want to share about that, and then we'll just kind of dive into related topics and also some of the indigenous traditions of the Americas that you work with.
hmm Yeah. So I was born in Mexico, in Guadalajara, Zapopan, and I moved out here with my parents, here in California, Los Angeles, when I was 5, and grew up in LA. And then, fast forward time, December 2012. That's December 2012. December 21st, 2012 was the big day for me. And before then, I was just going through some transitioning from old habits, old way of living, perspectives, and just, you know, being, just having a different way of living. And then the call for me, something in me was greater. So 2012 was the year of a new beginning for me, a new perspective, right? Yeah. So that year really, I got to meet a new community. Um, Actually, how it happened is that I started going to different visionary art galleries by myself.
Hmm.
Just like that, like there was a curiosity. And one time I saw a flyer about an event, and this man, he was releasing a book about his spiritual awakening, and the spiritual awakening, how it transformed his life. So I go to that event and I meet all these amazing conscious people, different backgrounds. I remember this older woman, she's doing a documentary on crop circles. and she was so cool. We got to connect, and I got to meet just a variety of different people. And then from there, I was like, how can I be connected to this community? I asked a woman in the front doing the registration, and then she pointed to two individuals who, became good friends of mine, and they introduced me to a community. And then from there, everything fell into place. Yeah. So that's how my
Beautiful.
journey started. Yeah.
Very cool. So you mentioned to me, I haven't asked you until today, but I was asking about your own background and your roots and ancestry, and I wonder if you could speak to that as well for a moment.
Totally. Um, so from what my mom tells me, she tells me that I'm from, or that we have a connection to the Kora. The Kora is a sister tribe to uh, Tarumaras, the Wirarikas, and that we have connections, relatives connected there, you know. And like I said, it's kind of hard, for me to trace back. But, I'm going from what I guess oral tradition, in a sense, just passing the word on, and so that's kind of like where my roots are. And, just reawakening that connection, that spirit that's in me that is connected to the roots.
Beautiful. Yeah, I was mentioning it's fascinating for me to hear. I haven't heard much about the Kora nation before this, but it's very interesting to hear that there's a connection there from the Kora and Tarumara, I think you said, to the Wirarika. That's very interesting to me, partially because we actually have a Wirarika elder coming here for an Interdependence Day event in just a few weeks that I'm excited about. And he's been here to visit our eco village before. Don Retakame from Mexico, from the Wirarika Huichol tribe. So I'm excited for that visit. And it's cool to hear that there's a
Mm,
connection to your own roots with the First Nations of Mexico there, which we'll
mm.
talk about. We're going to dive into some great topics today. I'm really excited for. Before we get into any specific kind of practices or studies, I want to ask you also from your own journey with these Kora Mexican roots to growing up in LA. 2012 is a big transformative year. And then you end up studying for, well, now how long has it been since 2012? 13 years. So for the past dozen, more than a dozen years, you've been deeply immersed, receiving some exposure, training, and ultimately sharing uh, things connected to some of the First Nations of South Central and North America. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to the particular tribes or tribal traditions that you've encountered or worked with different elders along your path, so that we know a little bit about the background of the lineages that you have some connection to in your journey.
Yeah, it's interesting how the great mystery works, and now how I'm seeing it is how our First Nation indigenous tribes work is through symbolism. And what I've got is that the cosmic spider, like I said, the cosmic spider is weaving those threads. And those threads are and each thread is a consciousness, it's a person. And I was one of those threads that was brought to the tradition of the deep south, Tawantinsuyu, in South America, in Peru, and then and out here in North America too, with uh, uh, here in the Lakota and Northern Plain natives. But my first journey began in connecting with the Quero Nation. And the first time I went to Peru was 2014, and it's an interesting one. But before I went to Peru, I connected to medicine man from Havasupai tribe, and he we kept crossing paths. I used to be in a nonprofit organization, and they would put together events to bring out different elders from different traditions to guide and share wisdom to future generations. And that's how I met the medicine man. And aside of that, we just kept crossing paths in different ceremonial contexts. And then one time we connected, and I was just going through some stuff, personal stuff, a spiritual crisis, and he invited me to help him out, and so I moved to Sedona, started helping him out in different ceremonies and sweat lodge, just different invocations, prayer. So he's from the Havasupai tribe from the Grand Canyon, peoples of the blue green waters, and they he represents a conduit to creator. So his medicine is a way of expressing and representing not just his culture, but also the universal connection of the indigenous ways and teachings. So I've learned, like, that's how I learned actually. I could deepen my prayer, my connection to my prayer. I remember every so often, like every couple, maybe 2, 3 times a week, we would get together for an hour, and we have deep conversations about nature, connection, ceremony. And then I went through a couple initiations because, I was apprenticing with him. I was, helping him out in ceremony. So we went to the Grand Canyon, 4-hour hike into the waterfalls, and then doing the initiational prayer with the water there. Then we went to Thunder Mountain and out there, and that was another initiation because Mountain, not a lot of people hike. It's the tallest mountain in Sedona. And it took most of the day. It was a bold move for us to do that. And once we got there, and there was that's part of another initiation. I got gifted a eagle feather, 4 directions, and all that beautiful acknowledgement. So he's the one who gave me the name Puma. Um, so before we went to Peru, um, before we went to Peru, he invited me to go to be a translator from English to Spanish, and um, so we went. Actually, even before we went to Peru, I connected with some of the Quechua people. Juan Graviel, that's one of the medicine men from the Quechua Nation that I remember connecting with, and also from the Bolivian nation. So I did that for about 2 months, get to know the context behind um, the different traditions, the different cultures, the similarities they have with the North and the South. And then I got to, do traditional ofrenda ceremonies, right? And also, in this particular timeline, it was important to share the wisdom, to share palabra. That's what we call the palabra, right? So when we say we're sharing the palabra, the context behind it is to share wisdom and to pass on the wisdom that it doesn't have to be like step by step. Oh, this is the way we do ceremony. No, it's just like the universal indigenous concepts and cosmovision in and sharing it with those who are coming of age or those who are stepping into walking the medicine path. So I got to do that with Juan Gabriel from the Quero. Then we traveled to Bolivia, with Roger at Isla uh, um, Lake Titicaca, and then we moved, travel into to the Bolivia traditional making of the food with the papas and the greetings of the music, and so really immersive culture and getting to know and then bring in the essence and teachings, right? And then from there we went to Brazil, and then that was a whole nother journey within itself. So that was the first time I was to really step into, or when I really started to open my eyes even further into the immersive indigenous worldview, the cosmovision of the different indigenous worldviews. I came back, and after a year or so, I came back to LA, and I got connected to um, my first sweat lodge, my first inipi, and that spoke to my heart because it's a different form of prayer. That's where I learned that's where it actually integrated my experience of learning how to pray with the tobacco and for directions when I was with what you call it, the medicine man from Havasupai. It really the Inipi really enforced to deepen my prayers, and where does that come from, right? Like that intention, that connection, the reverence and humility. So I met an uncle, and I worked with him for about 2.5 years, and to the point where I ended up being his fire tender. I went to Sundance, it's a different ceremony. I doing the during the fire tending, it was a whole nother teachings. So it's interesting that it's like it's all interconnected. Like the way I was introduced, to the medicine path, with in the Peruvian region that went to Suyu, and coming back to the north, and then integrating more of the Sweat Lodge, the Nipi, and those teachings as well. And
Well,
yeah, so I worked with Lakota uncle, and then I continued to be immersed in this Inipi ceremonial, also known as the Red Road. Essentially, the Red Road is it's a spiritual, it's a beauty way, the spiritual way, and it's not a easy, it's not an easy one. It's not an easy road to walk with because it's a thin road. So that's why these teachings and these practices are there to remind us to be in the center. So when I went, I'm gonna be jumping back and forth, but um, I also, was able to, in my early years, to tap into the cosmovision of the Shipibo, like and mestizo traditions, and working with the vegetales, the curanderos from there, and that's a whole other dimension as well. But it's all interconnected, it's interesting.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Puma. Um, and so this is really, really fascinating and rich for me. The Hawa Supai, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Havasupai.
Hawa Supai.
Mhm.
Um, people of the blue green water is the nation that this teacher you apprenticed with, who gave you the name Puma,
Yeah.
was representing, and sounds like some really powerful transmissions and initiations you received through that lineage, which sounds so special. I mean, just when you say Grand Canyon, because I've been there more than once, and there's just a certain subtle energy, even without being there physically right now. I can feel when you mention that place, and there's some very, very deep mystery that I'm familiar, that energy of that mystery that's there, to whatever small extent I can be. So it's so fascinating to hear how you directly immersed in that energy and that knowledge that's there. So that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And it's also inspiring to hear how you've kind of walked this road that maybe is narrow, but it's winding, where you're weaving together the threads of the North and South, and studied with both the Lakota in the North and the Shipibo and Quero Quechua people in Peru and Bolivia. Um, so it's really fascinating, and I can relate in certain ways to the kind of contact with different elders from different traditions, and yet the universality behind many of the teachings that are there, um, which we'll get into in a second. I know you've also mentioned to me some contact with both the Matsis, if I'm saying that correctly, tribe, and also sort of as you began to reconnect with your own roots and where you're from, you mentioned to me maybe some contact with Mexica folk healing arts of Mexico, curanderismo, curanderas and abuelas that you studied with, learned about different herbs and limpias and things of this nature. So since you didn't mention that as much, if you want to speak to that at all, just a little bit more context to that side of the story, since you went through pretty much everything else before we move on.
Yeah, totally. So I, I've noticed there's been um, cycles within my life, and as I shared, the first part of my journey, there were cycles that I was going through, cycles or timelines in which they were stable, they were at its peak, and there were lows and highs. So in 2018, that's where I started. I was living in Colorado at the time, and I did a combo ceremony. And this is an medicine from the Amazon from Peru region. And I got a call to learn how to facilitate and hold space and become a practitioner of this ceremony, this sacred ceremony here. And my intention was not to jump right away in in excitement, but really just to slowly and gradually take off into immersive knowledge of this particular tradition, which is it represents by the matzahs. And so for like first 2 years, first year I worked with different practitioners, and then the second year I started, or after that first year, a couple of months, I started kind of practicing more of myself, and community came in, they called it in. Community wanted some guidance and wanted me to hold space for them. Then it got to the point where I'm like, okay, I want to take this a little bit more deeper in terms of getting to know the tradition behind and what it represents. So in 2021, I went to Peru to visit the Matsis tribe and to visit the combo front, and it was a beautiful experience. The Matsis have a really beautiful cosmovision. The tribe that doesn't have a religion, but no, it they don't need like they are. They represent the connection, the spiritual connection of nature. And as easy as that sounds, or as like just general as that sounds, it's deep, right? Because the fractalization of the teachings and connections they have to certain animals and rituals is really important. And um, so that's how I got to connect with the Matsis tribes. They have a really beautiful energy. Robinson is one of the elders that I connected with, and his son Philip. So I was there for a little while, and I came back. But and then wow, it's just amazing how I'm really tracing back into my experience and my journey. So coming back, from from Peru. there was also a calling for me to connect to my roots.
Mm.
And during all that time, I had already uh, learned about curanderismo, which is a traditional uh, folk healing art from Mexico. And so I got to continue to unfold my path, like, to connect to where I was. It's like a full circle. Born in Mexico, and then born in Mexico, I went around to learn all these other cosmovisions and teachings to come back into like what I felt I needed to connect with my roots. And that was in connecting back to the traditions of, yeah, the Mexica and the Toltec, and the Wiraricas. And um so I started to learn about, and how I started is learning about curanderismo, which are different cleansing rites. They're called limpias, which we use different tools. For example, copalero, right? We use amador, egg for egg limpias, the barridas. We use also different plants, and we use water. So we use all the elements. We use intention, prayer. We use puros, and we use altecocoli, which is a conch, to also clear energy. And I work with curandera here in LA for my first year. So I got to learn a lot of that and the spiritual, you know, connection to that, and different ways of moving emotional energy, stagnation energy, cleanse the mind, body, and spirit, utilizing these tools. And so that's something that I do just in a private practice on with family members and friends. I still do. And then I wanted to go even deeper. I was like, I wanted to connect even more. So what does that mean, right? So to me, I was able to connect with another grandma here in LA. She was holding sacred space. She opened a sacred space and calling directions and sharing a lot of wisdom. And as you may know, they have stories. They have stories of all sorts. And she was holding a retreat, or not even a retreat. Sorry, this is more like an immersive of like reconnecting to the ancestral ways. And so her and her family, she has her lineage, curanderas de pies descalzos. That's like her lineage. And I went out there and got to experience different continuation of rites of passages. We went to the waters. So we went to this beautiful mountain, and this mountain is like the obsidian everywhere. We got to work with 7 obsidian stones. We went into the water. We prayed with the water. She gave teachings of the water and what it represents. And then I was in the water. There's a river sometimes coming down from the mountains. This river wasn't cold. It was warm. It's hot. So I was able to. We got guided to lay down on the waters, work with the stones, with the obsidians, right? And I was able to release a lot right there and then. What the reason why I was crying, I let tears out, is because I can't, like, this is what I've been looking for in like connecting deep with my roots. It's being led by an abuela, tradition, and it was just really powerful, profound. So we did different rites of passages for each element. Fire, fasted for 3 days. Um, and then on the third day, going to the cave, we worked with a copalero. We work with the fire. It's like, okay, so at sunrise, from sunset, you have to take care of your fire and do whatever it takes for you to keep that fire lit. Between all that, there's a lot of teachings. Obviously, there's a continuation of deepening that knowledge of the grandfather, and the wind and the earth. So it was all beautiful. And then I came back, really that really allowed me to feel good about myself, being good in my skin. It's like, oh, wait a minute, like I don't need permission to share the universality of where I'm come from, like the teachings of where I come from. It just really allowed me to step in and to feel more comfortable in sharing what calls my heart and my purpose in the humble way, right? With like authenticity. So that was really, really powerful. And since then, that was like 2022. I've been really just stepping into that more and more.
Hmm. That's beautiful, brother. I'm very happy to hear all of that. Happy for you and happy to see and feel, how we've both been growing since we last saw each other a while back. So it's really cool. Um, I want to ask you some more questions. You mentioned your work in the world, and we'll come back to that. You mentioned some of the knowledge of the Mexica and Toltec regions and so on, and I think we'll come back to, um, and maybe we'll actually start there. I wanted to share myself, in my own studies. There's a lot of overlap with some of what you're talking about. So, for example, uh, not just in terms of my practices, which I don't speak about as much, but in terms of like my writing, for instance, in my dissertation, I'm writing about the elements, which listeners may be tired of hearing about by now, but it's such a universal aspect. And of course, there's this need to represent how that's shows up in the original indigenous traditions where that's rooted, and to find that and honor that. And so, of course, the traditions of the Americas are a big part of that. And that's one of the reasons I feel it's so important to include a conversation like this one, where you can share with us about your roots and about these indigenous traditions of the Americas to some extent, to introduce listeners to that part of things and get more of a whole picture, more of a complete picture of this global wisdom. So, I think that's important. And one of the thing that came up for me is I'm very fascinated by the flag of Mexico.
Mm,
Just as one small example of this knowledge or sort of esoteric symbol that's so powerful still in the present day, just like Mexico City is still the capital in the present day. But all of that existing current nation with its capital and even its flag is built on the foundation of a much older and very powerful advanced civilization. That's one of the things that I find interesting, is when people argue about, like the lost advanced civilizations of the past, but they seem to think of it as like this controversial idea that's separate from the reality we already know, that
mm,
these nations were there and they were advanced. It's like right in front of you. It's right under your nose. It's not an alternative theory. It's just what the actual indigenous nations were. In many cases, were very sophisticated and developed empires, including in Mexico. And so, anyways, I'm curious if you have any perspective on the meaning of the flag, or where that comes from, or anything else that I'm speaking to you want to touch upon before we kind of move on to some other topics.
cool. Yeah, that's a deep one. But yeah, totally. So there's the flag, the snake, right, and the eagle, with that within itself, as you were mentioning, it has a meaning. It's a deep. So the snake represents the earth, the eagle represents knowledge, spirituality, both together, right? You're bridging two worlds. Um, but the Chichimecas, which are now known as the Aztecs, and they were travelers. I believe that says they came from north, and they were nomads. but then they were coming from Aztlan. That's what they say. They were coming from Aztlan and to look for a sign, and that sign, they said that it was an eagle and on the top of nopal eating a snake. So that's what for many years they were eventually they found that which was the vision, and they said this is where we're gonna build Tenochtitlan. And I'm gonna give you another perspective because there's also the original symbol. They said that it was, and it's written on the stone and the glyph, which is the eagle, but there's like Atlachinoli. So there's the eagle, but there's the eagle with in its beak, and there's like water and the symbol of water and fire, transmutation, transformation. Um, so there's there's just two possibilities. But in general, right? So the most thing that we see is the eagle and the snake eating the snake. And so that's kind of like the symbol, right? Symbolism of like the vision that the Aztecs were looking for and manifested there. And that's how Tenochtitlan was made, which is the city of Mexico right now. And they call it like because it was on the on the waters. So they did the milpas. That's how they grew water and because they built the city on top of the water. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it's
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it's I'm learning a lot just listening to you, and um I've also heard it interpreted where the fact that the snake is kind of devouring, or sorry, the eagle is devouring the snake on top of the cactus can also have this different layers of meaning and association, as with many of these kind of emblems. And my understanding, one of those is like truth devouring illusion on a certain level,
mm,
and that the snake can be a symbol of rebirth, right? Because it's shedding skin and then grows new skin. It's death and rebirth. It's like the initiation of death and rebirth and those cycles through time. But ultimately, the eagle is kind of like this eagle's bird's eye view, like transcending the entrapment in those cycles of death and rebirth. And so it's kind of like this free, you know, spirit of the transcendent vision of the eagle, of the bird's eye view that's above the separation of these subjective viewpoints, that's above this temporal cycle of time and death and rebirth, that's like goes beyond that, the eternal immortal spirits. That's like the ultimate initiation of death and rebirth, is like the death of the illusion of the ego that goes through these cycles, and the birth into the eternal self on some level is one way I think to also look at it,
mm.
which I find interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's beautiful because that's in that internal battle, and they call it. There's a name for that, and it's the Guerra Florida. That's the flowering, the war that is flowering, and that what's represented is that your enemy is yourself. That's kind of like like a teaching that comes from from this tradition. It's like, yeah, you're going. The flowers are representing transformation, right? So it's also all interconnected. So the snake, the eagle, the inner battle, the transformation outward, create a new, shed the old.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great perspective on warriorship too. I think that one of the misconceptions people have if they interpret all of the legends and hieroglyphs literally and at a face value is they think that it's all talking about, war and human sacrifice and things like this. And on one level, at least more than we realize in the West, a lot of those things are poetic teachings about ego death, about self sacrifice, about the internal warriorship, the battle, just like the Bhagavad Gita is about, warriorship. It's like not shying away from the internal confrontation with your own illusions, and like the battle for awakening yourself to the real truth, even when it's uncomfortable for the ego, and so on. So I think that sometimes we underestimate the degree of insight that's there, often intentionally, not just archetypally, which is part of it, but also consciously, intentionally encoded in the teachings is this knowledge that it's also a metaphor for the internal terrain as you're speaking to. So, um,
100%. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, good stuff. Well, so broader question, beyond just Mesoamerica, you've used the word cosmovision several times, and
Mm.
sort of worldview. I associate it with the word paradigm. What is the cosmovision you're referring to, especially the kind of intertribal level that you were describing, with all the directions? What's kind of the foundation of how you relate to what you understand to be the sort of cosmovision, overarching worldview of these native traditions that you're studying with, that you've encountered and that you come from?
Yeah. For me, um, well, one thing I learned is that these ancient civilizations, they brought kind of like the holding space of awareness of how the universe works, and they were able to bring that into a manifested reality, which guides their culture in the way the culture grows as a society or as a civilization. And that's why it's sacred. That's why there's a lot of symbolism. That's why there's a lot of like different objects represent different things that are sacred or that are from the cosmos. Just real quick. So, like a Tlemite, I mean, I looked over there because I had Tlemite or a Poposhkomi. It's just a really quick example. Or the Tlemite is a Copalero, Samador. It has the circle, the base, and it has a handle. So the commonality, the cosmovision of what I think, at least what I've like kind of searched, is that the world is a dual. There's a duality in this world, and that is universal law, right? And each independent civilization, right, was able to uh, within themselves realize that. They didn't, I mean, there was trades. Eventually there were trades, yeah, because they had to start, they figured out that, oh, for example, corn, maybe there's rice in another civilization, so they have to start to plant and agriculturally stationary, and that's how each civilization was able to move. But that represents, for example, the Poposkomi represents a duality. The circle represents feminine. The handle represents masculine. Together, they create uh, life, right? Um, so for me, is the universal. For me, my cosmovision is universal in terms of like, hey, there's the teachings of the four cardinal directions, and that is the basis and foundation of most spiritual traditions, right? And from what I've studied is that it's really common, and each direction, right, represents um, a stage in life, or it represents a certain herb, or it represents um, like, for example, um, spiritual, mental, emotional, right, physical. There's these multi-dimensional aspects that are in a circle, and the circle is represents harmony. It represents, here and northern plains, the sacred hoop, right? And it represents no beginning, no end. So it's always it represents wholesome. The circle represents wholesome, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. How the sun, or how the earth moves, the planets are circles. Like, yeah, circle is sacred, you know. Um, I was, sorry, headphone fell off. Um, I was, um, I was talking to a friend of mine, and his niece was right next to us, and she was doing, playing around. And what I noticed on top of the head, she's like 1 year old, and it had a spiral. She had like, I don't know if most of us have that when we grow. There's hair, and then it grows in a circle, and that was like counterclockwise. I mean clockwise. So it's everywhere. It's a spiral. It's a circle moving up, right? So for me, that's kind of like the universality, the cosmovision. For me, the teachings are based on that, like the foundation, right? The basics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very deep. You're speaking to the polarities of the masculine and feminine energy represented, even though in nature those polarities are showing us how they come together to create new life and the future generations over time. But then you're also showing how in space they're represented by the geometry
Mm,
and the sacred symbolism of the circle and the rod or the line, and how the combination of those two, the stem of the copalero that holds it up, which is like a sensor, that has a base, and then there's the bowl at the top that holds the coals, the embers, and the incense, the copal, for the sacred smoke. And so it's like this little fire inside of the bowl is the embers of that eternal flame, and then the herbs, the sacred herbs, like the copal resin that goes onto that, creates the sacred smoke of the air element. And you use that for your limpias, your cleansings, and so on. And so um, this you're describing this amazing symbolism and the architecture, the beauty of the kind of universal esoteric teachings of this geometric knowledge of the rod and the circle together, the stem or the straight line of the copalera at the base, and then the circle at the top, holding the, or copalera, the circle at the top,
mhm,
and how the two come together. And so that's beautiful, because then when you get that linear and that circular or cyclical movement combined, that's when you
mhm,
have this helical, spiraling, snake-like shape that kind of undulates and waves. Like when you look at two-dimensionally spiral, it looks like a wave up and down, like a vibration, a sine wave, that all of matter is made out of this moving energy of the up and down, back and forth like a snake. But in a three-dimensional vision, that wave is actually just symbolizing a spiraling forward through space in circles that move forward over time on a line. So it's the combination creates the spiral. And it's the same thing, like you said, with the planets around the sun, they're moving, but that's all itself is spiraling around the center of the galaxy and moving through space. So it's just these helixes within helixes within
mhm.
helixes of this, kind of intertwined serpentine spiral. It's very, very beautiful. Thank you for describing that. And I think you're right. I even personally think that, like, the symbolism of the compass and the square, and masonry and so on, is all about that same architecture and geometry of the masculine and feminine, circular and straight line. And there's a lot there to explore. But it is, I believe, like you said, a pretty universal phenomenon. What we're talking about. I was looking at the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the sacred codex of the Popol Vuh, and right from the beginning, it starts describing how all of creation was created with these measurements, like the building of a house. So it's got this like architectural, geometric quality to it.
Yeah.
Well, I've been babbling on, so why don't I ask you one last question on this topic, and then we'll move on to some of what your work is in the world before we need to call it a day. So, last question: you're talking about on this topic. You're talking about the directions and this kind of crux, and how that's this foundation. the associations of each direction, and so on. So I'm curious, like, how do you experientially relate to that in your life? Like, what is this indigenous spirituality based in its essence, in terms of how you're relating to the world around you? I can pause there, or I can clarify what
Hmm.
I mean, but yeah.
Yeah, the integration of that is to kind of like when I go around, just having that in mind always. That's kind of like my grounding force. And naturally it just unfolds. Like I just know. Like it's not like I'm telling everybody, hey, this and that, that and this. Like I was able to, I mean, yes, I could do that, but this foundational is for personal internal development of the self. And within that comes the wisdom, right? Because um, when I go, for example, everywhere I go, when I go hiking, when I could go hiking, um, I've noticed that I want to go, like when I go hiking, I go around, like, I don't know, these patterns, you start noticing patterns. And the basic, um, just awareness of noticing patterns really help to integrate life, like really help to integrate my thoughts and how I see the world. And really, there's nothing beyond that at that moment because like it helps me to stay grounded. It's really easy. Like once I'm able to really embody those foundational teachings, and that could just be like just seeing nature for what it is. Like really, it's just like it's really simple. But the rest, because like what this helps, it's like this is not for the logical mind. That as the mind is not gonna be able to interpret that. It's more like all these teachings and information symbol. It's for the soul. It's for spiritual food, and that's what's going to keep us content in a spiritual path. And so, for example, every morning, like today, I lit up my copal. I use my charcoal, and I sang some songs, and morning songs also. So there's awareness about the days as well. So as you know, the circle moves counterclockwise. So there's certain points of the day where I'm also human, so I don't do this every time sometimes, but it's in my mind and it's in the back of my mind to ground and do my prayer, like Michael Platt, say my prayer, like I cleanse this energy, I go in my room, sing a song whenever I can. But that always really helps the contentment of the heart, of the inner world, inner scape to feel grounded. Like, you know, yeah, I understand. Like, we're busy sometimes and all that, but the important thing is that to not over, for me, is to always remind myself the basics. And then from there, once I start cultivating like a practice around the elements, like I go to the beach, sometimes to Long Beach, it's not far away from me, do my offering with tobacco. I say thank you to the ocean. It sounds really basic, but it's about it's about action. It's about action. So this is what I've been learning because I can't just be like, oh, I can't just be waiting for something to happen. You know, they say that in the Aztec calendar, you could see what day you were born, and there's like there's certain energies, four energies that support you on that day. So the teaching for that is that in order for them to work and help you, you need to embody those qualities in order for that to activate and accomplish that energy. Because if I'm not doing that, then it's probably gonna take a while for things to kind of start to understand. And I'm speaking more in the context of the calendar because there's each deity has a certain quality, this and that. Um, and it's deep, but that's just an example of like we just need to take action and always remind ourselves about the basics. And that's kind of where I ground myself. And obviously, I can go and expand more on different perspectives and ways of cultivating and evolving consciousness, but always keep a rooted. I always like to keep myself rooted with the foundational teachings of the indigenous perspective. You know, so that's what I've been kind of like. That's how I'm seeing things right now. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Um, I'm glad you bring up the energies of the days and the calendar, and the way that you're aligning with that with your daily prayers and actions and songs. I think sometimes people don't realize that even in the English language, and really in all the traditions, just the names of the days were actually referencing deities, like you said. They're actually deities, and every time you even just say the word, oh, it's Monday, it's Sunday, you're saying it's moon deity, it's
Mm.
sun deity, it's Thursday deity, it's Thor, it's thunder. So in many different traditions, it's the same knowledge of that each day is a deity unto itself. So anyways, let's keep moving. So I want to ask about your work in the world, what you do now. Share all about your workshops, your instrumentalism with the drum, with flute, and different instruments you work with, and practices that you share. So I'd love to hear about your work in the world. Maybe we just start there, and this will be one of our final topics here for today.
Cool. Um, yeah, I've throughout the years I've cultivated as much as I've immersed myself in indigenous cosmovision and practices. That has led me to get to know other holistic approaches towards bringing oneself to a harmonious whole uh, energy being, right? And so I could say I could start off where I do sound journeys, also known as sound healings, sound baths, and stuff. I studied that, found this amazing school that the school teaches not about only sound. It's about or creating an experience, but it's about how to utilize these instruments for an integral sound experience or working with one-on-one with individuals. So we're not really just looking for creating just an experience can help to decrease stress, right? And uh, bring in more oxygen to the brain, but also how can we help the recipient in terms of like spirituality, mental, emotional, and physical. So I'm integrating those aspects as well. So I'm not just doing the physical, but also kind of assessing the energy, utilizing for example, a bell or utilizing a Tibetan bowl, one Tibetan bowl, and scanning the energy, the biofield of the person. And then once I feel like there's a dip or there's a little bit too much energy or or it's really intuitive. So that's what I do. So I do privates utilizing these tools and also do collective group sound bath particular. Um, and I also teach the Native American flute style. And I've been doing like group workshops, um, and also do Zoom. Um, I do Zoom workshops as well for the Native American flute. And those are great. It's all interconnected because all these sacred instruments, they're like, for example, they're ancient instruments, and the flute being one of them. And I also huge workshops on the sacred drumming, hand drumming, and that was like a really deep workshop because of what we talked about, like what I shared about the four directions and like that particular worldview, the cyclical worldview, it's all represented in the drum. It's all represented in the drum. All those teachings, it's like you're holding on to a lot of information when we work with the hand drum. And I really love teaching those. We create collectively. This workshop is about empowering. It's about holding space for each other and encouraging each other and creating a safe space for you to express yourself. So we activate the voice. We do activation of the throat. We also, to me personally, what I've come to realize is that we activate the solar plexus energy center, the throat energy center, and the third eye energy center. So the self-esteem, the your authentic self, and then your words, your palabra, right? Really embodying and activating that side of you, because that's really important, because sometimes what I've noticed, I've done a lot of internal work, and when I started, my vocal range were interesting. They were like, in a way, they were just really gentle in a register that was just really humble and maybe a little bit too over humble that it could have been unconsciously egotistic without me knowing at that time. So now throughout the years, I was able to regain that energy, that self-acceptance for who I am. And the drum has helped me to find my true tone. Because sometimes I get to talk like this, and it's just sometimes it's interesting to talk like this because it shows I'm fulfilling a prophecy, a self-fulfilling a prophecy that it's just like really doubtful in myself. But then as I started working on myself and incorporating the drum on my like singing to my altar, then I started to really empower myself, self-empowering. That's how powerful the drum is for me. So that's the energy, like that's the energy that I want to bring into the space. But not only that, but also bring in the earth spirituality, the four directions, the symbology of what that means, what the drum represents, the four directions, bring in aspects of ceremony too, calling in the four directions, creating sacred time and space. Uh, to me is really important because that sets the tone for the rest of the workshop, for the rest of the experience, ceremonial workshop in this case. Um, and it's really beautiful. Uh, and then so that the drum, there's a portion where we all chant together, where we all express together, when we all uh, present ourselves into the front of the altar while the community is holding space for us. But that's really important. One thing that I learned about uh, you know, in Mexico, is that like it takes a community to do the work as well. We could do independent internal work, but we're social beings. And some of the ceremonies, like the danzas, and and some other ceremonies, even the inipis, and it takes a community to build a sacred space. Um, and so that's what I want to bring in is that empowering each other, but the collective. So I do, yeah. So that's kind of like the main thing. I also do breath work and offer some breath work and combination of cacao with some.
Beautiful. Thank you, Puma. Well, I hope we get a chance to further collaborate, maybe organize some course or workshop together. We're doing breath work every week right now in Colorado Springs at a healing center there. And um, as I mentioned, we have Ritakame, the Wirarika elder, coming here in a few
Mm,
weeks for Interdependence Day. There's a local Lakota elder named Joseph Medicine Robe, who also actually studied with Thich Nhat Hanh during his life, interestingly enough. So he's a very
mm,
special soul. Came to our last spring equinox event, and I hope to have him on this podcast at some moment and coming to events. Nana Marina Cruz from Guatemala has visited us
Nice.
multiple times, and hopefully we'll be back next year. And Maestro Manuel, our teachers, Taino. So there's many different, native teachers we work with, and hope to keep sharing with the world about these topics that way. And it's really, really nice to reconnect with you as a friend and brother, and really happy to hear about all the work that you're doing. It's really nice, and so hopefully we can um, bring you into some of our events sometime, or maybe I'll come out to California. I know you're in LA region right now. Maybe that can be my very last question, is if you have any final words on, in terms of how do you see the knowledge and the practices that we're talking about today, the teachings of these ancient traditions, applying to help in the world today, in the society at large? What insight do you have as to what's a good approach for how people can relate to these times of change that we're all living in together in one way or another?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. It's a good one. And to me, what I would feel comfortable in sharing is that, as again, as simple as it sounds, be, put it this way, we are born with a purpose, and there's some individuals who are there to be in the front lines, some individuals who are there to be um, holding space, and some individuals are there to be, a mediator to some other energies. Um, but at the end, it comes down to us, and if we are able to keep a practice, like a like I said earlier, like a simple practice of lighting your copal, or just even doing an offering, as simple as it sounds, because maybe we can't be in the front lines, or we can't be doing some other things, that we wish to do, but it's all about how we are able to present ourselves to Creator. And that may just simply be silence, and they say start with oneself. So get to know the four directions, get to know the elements, start with your foundation, building a foundation. And that's going to help us to be centered and cultivate our own unique practice. Like from these teachings, you get to incorporate and make your own natural practice is that is in all of us. This ceremony, sacred space, it's in all of us, or however somebody wants to interpret that. But just the water, earth, the fire, the wind, Father Sky, um, and acknowledgement. I think it's mainly about acknowledging. Yeah. So if I would recommend that, just step into that. I know it sounds simple, but only because it's simple, not take it lightly. I like to say that I don't take this lightly, because once we get to do that practice, the inherent wisdom within ourselves, it starts to sprout. And and I start to realize the connections about, certain things in nature, and that inherent wisdom, knowledge starts to come up, and perspectives start to shape. So and that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Speaking for myself, but
No, I couldn't agree more. I'm really glad that you're sharing that. And that's the foundation of this organization and this platform, that taking responsibility for change from the inside out. And that's also the teachings of many of these wisdom traditions, is that when we can illumine the hidden parts of our own soul, our own being, then that brings our life into harmony, our relations with those around us, and our home, our household, our immediate surroundings, and it creates a more strong foundation for an honorable nation, and nations that are in harmony and honor can also harmonize with each other and create a more peaceful world. So it might sound to some people like an escape or an excuse if you haven't really looked at it, but it's
Mm.
not. It's not lightly. It's that we're saying that no, this is actually like the necessary thing for humanity and for society and for the collective to actually change and grow, is that it starts with awareness. Otherwise it's just, we put on another fancy system after another revolution, we put on another fancy new philosophy, and now it's this one and now it's that one, but behind the surface is the same greed and the same totalitarianism and ego that all just bubbles up in the new way. So we need to start from inside, and it's not really possible to set up like a lasting change unless we do that. So I agree with that. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today, brother. And it's always good to see you. I'm looking forward to stay connected.
Thank you, brother. Likewise, I'm definitely looking forward to connecting further and even going out there, and see what you got going, or would love to collaborate in any way.
Beautiful. Thanks, Puma. Much love.
Much love. Peace.
Peace.